What is up, and welcome to the newest edition of the Lakers Theory podcast. I'm Shane Jackson. Joined with me is Austin Case. And congratulations to the Los Angeles Lakers for winning the 2021 NBA championship. Is that fair to say already, Austin, after a weekend of moves?
Sure. That I have that feeling. I can feel that. I can feel that energy.
Yes, we will get into all the moves and break them down individually. Right off the bat, though, the Lakers have gotten better. The defending champs have gotten better as a basketball team than they were just, 2 months ago, winning an NBA title. That's why I'm very confident already going into this season. Probably a lot more confident than I was going into last season, even though they did get Anthony Davis. And they're still, obviously, we're waiting on that news as well, getting Anthony Davis to come to the Lakers. But let's recap quickly the moves. We're recording this on a Sunday, and we'll just, in case for some reason when you're listening to this, you don't know what's happened, I figured we would just tell you real quick what has happened. Right before we started doing the podcast is when Marc Gasol, it was announced that he was agreed to a deal with the Lakers. I think it's 2 years. We don't know the price or the official details of that deal because it wasn't available at the time, but also, the Lakers brought in Montrezl Harrell, who signed a 2-year contract, $19 million. Wesley Matthews reportedly signed a biannual exception for $3.6 million. And then KCP is back with a 3-year, $40 million deal. That's big time as well. Lakers roster is coming into shape. I think there's officially 9 guys on this roster. And then, we're still waiting on the news of Anthony Davis, I believe, and then Markieff Morris as well. We'll get into specifics, though, of each player and what they're going to bring to the team, similar to what we did the last podcast with Dennis Schroeder. And we'll show highlights as well when we're talking about these guys. But first off, I wanted to get your initial takeaway from a weekend full of moves for the Lakers. What was your first thought when you saw all these moves go down?
Well, my first thought was it's crazy to think that they got better. Mm-hmm. And even though they're losing, four guys, possibly 5, we still don't know what Markieff is going to do.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to think that they got better, and I do believe that. I'm excited. We still have to see what happens once they start playing together. They're going to have to click, and the chemistry is going to have to be there. But if you're LeBron and AD as your core. You brought KCP back, which was, you could say we agreed that was probably the third guy that they needed to have on their team. Mm-hmm. That was a realistic option. And so I'm excited. I'm very excited. Marc Gasol was a guy that I wanted them to go out and get, but I had no idea if it was even going to be possible. Because he was coming off of a pretty big contract, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so I saw that and I was like, well, there's probably no way. But I thought, this is a guy that could be a game changer for them if they were to lose Dwight and JaVale. And so it's going to be an exciting season.
Yeah, aside from believing the Lakers got better, believing the defending champs got improved, and beside the fact that I thought this is now the Lakers are the clear favorite, I think, to win the 2021 NBA title, even though I'm already going to start celebrating it right now on this podcast. Those were my initial takeaways. But a bigger one for me, and I think we've alluded to it now a couple podcasts on the Lakers Theory podcast, is that the identity of this team is clearly changing. Last year, in that title run, they were built on defense, and we've spoke about maybe the half-court offense not being as inspiring at times. And these moves over the weekend indicate that the Lakers are going to be a different-looking team next year. And it's an interesting tactic for a team that's coming off a title run in a year where there was a lot of weird things that happened, and they had to play in a bubble and all that. But credit to the Lakers for not wanting to be complacent. They looked at the roster and said, hey, I know we won a title, but we can be better than that. Maybe they won't be better. Maybe it just looks better on paper. But credit to the Lakers for saying, I know this was our identity last year, but we can win with a different identity, and we believe it's going to bring the best out of us, and it give us the best shot at repeating as champions. And so I think that was my biggest takeaway, was that, Rob Pelinka is not afraid to mix things up right after the Lakers won a title, and credit to the Lakers for at least being aggressive this offseason when, defending champions in almost any sport would have been fine with just running it back, or maybe guys left the team and got paydays and you got worse. But it doesn't look like that, at least on paper as of now. And I'm excited about the Lakers season getting underway as well. Let's look at a big picture view of it, though. What was your big picture view of how you expect these moves to impact the Lakers moving forward?
So you kind of hit on it a little bit there. I think their half-court offense improves.
Mm-hmm.
They got younger. I feel like they're going to be way more athletic, even though, the loss of Dwight and JaVale, that takes a hit from a big standpoint. Yeah. But Schroeder, Harrell, and at least Schroeder and Harrell, I think those guys are going to bring a specific energy that they lacked off the bench, if is what happens with those guys. So big picture, I think they improved in a lot of ways. Their interior defense, I think, is going to be a question mark, what they're going to do there. It's going to be hard to match what Dwight and JaVale brought there. JaVale kind of wasn't as effective once in the bubble, and that's where Dwight stepped up. So it's going to be interesting to see how that part plays out, because that was a big deal, especially with the Nuggets. And so I'm curious to see how that plays out. But aside from that, I think they got better. Just flat out better.
Yeah, I think that is the way to look at a combination of these moves all together as one. Kind of one clear observation for it is that they got better in a particular area. I mean, they want to improve their half-court offense. I think for me, again, I came to, as we mentioned in the first podcast, where we talked about our fandom and what we're bringing to this podcast. I came to this as a LeBron fan for the Lakers. I wasn't born into this Lakers fandom. I'm here because of LeBron. I'm a bandwagon fan. And I've watched a lot of LeBron-led teams be this in the offseason. They sign these veterans for minimum contracts, and then he carries these guys to the finals. Not all of them, obviously. He's been on some really good teams, but that's felt like a lot of what the offseason moves have been in the past on these LeBron-led teams. This group, these moves are different. I mean, they're adding playmakers around him, and younger playmakers in particular around him, and it signals to me going into this year that LeBron may not be asked to shoulder the load as much as he needs to in the regular season, or as he has in the regular season. It's one of those things where, and I think we mentioned with the Dennis Schroeder acquisition, but Harrell as well. I mean, you're getting guys that can get buckets and bring a level of offensive consistency on without LeBron on the floor or with LeBron on the floor. And I think it just takes off, the load on the shoulders of LeBron or Anthony Davis. And I think that's exciting. I think last year, when you looked at the team, it almost felt like they didn't have a chance when LeBron was on the floor. I mean, their non-LeBron minutes, they were always down. And I think they have a chance to crush teams in the non-LeBron minutes. And that's a big deal. And then get to the postseason, as the 1-2 seed, whatever it is. And guess who's the most consistent player in the postseason, or has been this last postseason? It's LeBron. And so I think this is a big deal. It's going to, especially in a year where there's a shortened off season, even more than normal, you're taking the load off of LeBron and potentially Anthony Davis as well. And that to me is exciting. We'll see if it works out.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was thinking as well. Mm-hmm. A lot of these moves are so LeBron and AD don't have to, just be out there 24/7. Like when LeBron's not on the court, I think the team's going to be a lot better than they were last year. And, there's space here where potentially they can both get rest at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so that's good. And I think that's what Pelinka had in mind when going out and targeting these guys and bringing them in. I think he was thinking, we have to figure out a way where we're not in jeopardy when LeBron's off the court. And we also need to figure out how we can rest LeBron and AD at the same time. It's going to be exciting, and I'm excited. When you were kind of talking about it, I got the chills a little bit.
There's obviously going to be concern, and I mentioned this with Dennis Schroeder as well, that there is a way that this doesn't work out. And the concern here, obviously, is that defensively they take a hit, where a team was built on their defensive identity, and they were one of the better defenses in the NBA, and that takes a hit. But I remain optimistic that maybe the defense doesn't carry them in regular season, but by the postseason, a lot of these guys buy in, and you go collect another ring in 2021. So with that, let's talk about these moves individually. And I know I have Marc Gasol here first, but let's actually start with Montrezl Harrell, because I think that's the one to me that stands out. The one I'm most excited about, at least from the moves that happened over this weekend. As you mentioned, 27 years old. He's coming off career highs, 18.6 points per game and 7.1 rebounds last season for the Clippers, on his way to Sixth Man of the Year. I believe. Did he actually win the award?
I think
Schroeder?
so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he won it, and Schroeder was next
second. Yeah, that's right. I got those confused instantly when I started talking about it just now on the podcast. Austin, tell me about Harrell. What stands out from what you've read about him or watched in highlights? And we're about to show highlights while Austin's talking.
So what I think we're getting in Harrell, we're getting just a straight up scrappy defender, high energy guy. He's also athletic. And so that's a big thing. Kuz is athletic too, and his defense improved drastically. But I feel like Harrell brings that already. We're not going to need him to make that big of a jump just throughout the season. And I personally, I think he is a good defender. I think he's going to be better. Just with the mind and the system that Vogel runs is defensive centered, and so I think there's room for improvement there. And so another thing I think is going to be big with Harrell is the pick and roll. He's probably going to come off the bench a lot, and so whoever's running the point, whoever's bringing the ball up, whether that be Schroeder or LeBron even. A lot of the highlights that I was watching of him, it was some of them a lot were pick and rolls.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be big. And so there's a lot to look forward to with him. And just kind of a down thing that I saw is his size. He's only 6'7", which still is massive compared to us, but for a 4, that might be a little undersized. But he makes up for that with just his tenacity.
Yeah, led the league in double-doubles off the bench with 11 last year. He obviously came off the bench for the Clippers. I thought at the time when the move happened that he was probably going to start at the 5 for the Lakers, and then the Marc Gasol news happened, moments before we started recording this podcast. And if gun to my head, I would guess Marc Gasol is in the starting lineup, and Harrell's maybe coming off the bench. But maybe that's not what happens when it gets to the season. You mentioned his role or the way he rolls the basket. Obviously, I think that's what he brings most to the Lakers. I'm very excited about that. Obviously, there's going to be criticism about Harrell. I mean, he's not a perfect player by any means. I think, maybe you're a little bit higher on his defense of play than I am, but I think AD complements him in a way that will at least maybe hide some of that defensive inefficiencies. And there was obviously the biggest criticism towards him was maybe down the stretch for the Clippers, his bubble play, postseason play, but there were some off the court issues for him dealing with all that. So I don't know. Maybe a new team, he's ready to buy in and he's wanting to prove something, and maybe that is starting at center. I don't know. I happen to think that the Lakers wouldn't make this move if they thought they were concerned about some of those limitations that maybe fans were immediately talking about when the acquisition was made. I don't know. Is there anything that you're super concerned about other than maybe his size?
Um, I mean, you kind of said maybe defensively down the stretch there that he fell off. Maybe the locker room, maybe they didn't have someone in there that would call him out. Because just from his play, you can kind of see he's a fiery guy. So maybe once they got down there in the bubble, nobody wanted to say, hey, pick it up or get your act together. LeBron's not going to be scared to do that.
Yeah.
If he's causing issues, LeBron's going to say, hey, this isn't about you. We're trying to win a championship for these guys that's never done it before, and we're trying to win more championships for the guys who have them. So I think just the chemistry and just the overall support group that you would probably find in the Lakers locker room is going to be a lot better for potentially a guy like Harrell.
Yeah, I think he's going to bring something, especially on the offensive end, that maybe wasn't there with Dwight Howard. I think there's going to be things that the Lakers are going to miss about not having Dwight Howard, but offensively, that's not going to be one of them. I think I'm very excited, especially, I mean, if he is coming off the bench. I mean, if you look at the rotations, I mean, if he is maybe paired up with Schroeder in those pick and roll situations off the bench, I don't know. That could be exciting and alludes to what we were talking about in the non-LeBron minutes. I mean, I think it could bring the most out of that, maybe the reserve unit. Let's go ahead and get into the other players, and hopefully the highlights are better than the Harrell highlights there. I was struggling with the YouTube. But no, let's start with, what do you say, Marc Gasol? Because it just happened a little bit ago. Is that the next one you want to go to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Marc Gasol, 35 years old, so he's not Harrell in that regard when we were talking about his age. Three-time All-Star who's averaged about, 14 points per game, it looks like, 7 rebounds per game, and about 2.4 assists and 1.4 blocks. Not coming off one of his better years, though. Actually, one of his worst years. He averaged 7.5 points per game, 6.3 rebounds, and 3.3 assists during the regular season, while shooting a career low 42% from the floor. Some of that, as I've read about, is Marc Gasol taking more threes, or maybe taking about 44% of his, or was it 42% of his shots from beyond the arc. Probably not something he's going to do a lot of with the Lakers, I would imagine. But what have you noticed, maybe from reading about Marc Gasol or watching any highlights? I mean, what is your initial takeaway from Marc Gasol joining the Lakers?
And so I think something I noticed, just an upgrade from what possibly Dwight and JaVale brought to the team, is mid-range and the outside shot. And so when he's in there at 5, he's a guy that you have to step out on. You can't just give him open threes because he's going to hit those. But I think that's a big thing. You kind of said that his scoring was down because he was taking more threes. But with the type of offense that the Lakers have, that could benefit him. Even if he is taking 43% of his shots are threes.
Yeah.
That could be beneficial towards him in the type of offense that the Lakers have. Kind of something that I saw, and this could just be overhyped because they are highlight videos. But it looks like he is a good passer from the block and down low. And so I think that's a good thing. Not that JaVale and Dwight were bad at it, but that's something you're going to need, just in case for some reason maybe he has 2 guys on him, or he's just good at finding the open guy. Because once you get the ball down low, sometimes guys turn their back. And so that will be beneficial for them to have a guy that can potentially find the open man. Just a little bit of something that could just some negatives. I think his rim protection is not even close to what Dwight and JaVale brought. And so that was kind of the big identity for the Lakers, was their rim protection. But also he's not as athletic. And so that could be an issue, that it's probably offset with the other acquisitions that they brought on. But those are just kind of two things that I noticed: rim protection, and he's not nearly as athletic as Dwight and JaVale.
I'm glad you brought up the passing. That was obviously something I've noticed as well, or something that stood out to me. I'm a big sucker for posts who are good passer, anyways. So I found that interesting, at least, and I'm glad you mentioned it. It means I wasn't alone in thinking, hey, maybe he has he's a little bit better passer than maybe he's given credit for. Maybe he is given credit for. I don't know. It's not like I sit there and read a bunch of Raptors articles on the Raptors, but no. Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of downplayed his ability to stretch the floor, but that's a real thing. It's something Dwight Howard obviously didn't do. And he does bring a certain element of physicality to his play, maybe on the defensive end in particular, that could be somewhat matched Dwight Howard's physical presence, or at least make it seem like it wasn't as much of a drop-off. I don't know about you, but I think Marc Gasol is going to be the one who ends up winning out as the starting five. Maybe I am alone. It's not like I've been reading anybody who's predicting the starting lineup by any means. Gut check tells me right before the podcast happened that when this news dropped, that I was like, that's your starting center. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, that's
okay.
That was a big thing. I know that they want to bring Markieff back, and so from what I was reading in all the cap experts, I'll call them, it wasn't going to be possible, or it was going to be very hard to bring Markieff back with JaVale, and it's $4.2 million on the team. And so I think we got the news that they traded JaVale first, and kind of I alluded to that in our group me, and kind of the next thing I was like, we're probably going to get Marc Gasol news pretty soon. I also thought Markieff Morris we would get news about that soon, but maybe not yet. So I do think he starts. And yeah, I kind of maybe didn't get that point across about his physicality. Yeah, he is. He's a big guy. I think it was 6'11", 255. That's big.
Yeah.
And so he's going to be physical, and so I think that will help them. But yeah, sorry.
last note worth mentioning: Marc and Pau Gasol, first set of brothers to play for the Lakers at any point in their career. I saw ESPN tweet about that right before we started recording, and obviously that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, actually, the Lakers drafted Marc Gasol.
Yeah.
But he never played. So that is cool.
Moving from one family connection for the Lakers to another, Wesley Matthews, an 11-year NBA veteran. Matthews has played in 791 games, 729 starts for a lot of teams. Most recently, Milwaukee. His career averages are 13.1 points per game, 3 rebounds, 2.1 assists, and 1 steal in 31.9 minutes per action. He's already made the most three-pointers of any undrafted player in the NBA history. You've probably heard that anytime you've watched maybe a Bucks game, because I'm sure they've mentioned that on the broadcast a billion times. He played and started in 67 games for Milwaukee last season, averaging 7.4 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1.4 assists in 24 minutes of action. Austin, first thought when you saw the Wesley Matthews deal. I know you mentioned in the last pod that this is a guy that you thought the Lakers were going to get all along.
Yeah, and so Wesley Matthews is, pretty much Danny Green. We kind of, before we started recording, that was kind of what I alluded to, because I couldn't find a lot on him, and what I could, I was like, this guy's Danny Green. So we have a feeling what we're going to get with him. He's a 3 guy. He's a defensive guy. Kind of something that I saw was he's a little inefficient, which, we saw that from Danny Green over the course of last season. So, but it's exciting. He's going to be able to step in. I don't know if he's going to start. I think he does. The only way I could see him coming off the bench is if they do maybe Schroeder at the 1, KCP at 2, and then kind of LeBron, AD, and Gasol. So he's going to provide good depth, and I look forward to seeing him play. And he's going to be a good asset to the team.
Very important to get a new Danny Green because, as I said on the last podcast, that I was sad to see Danny Green go because I didn't have anybody else to blame. So if Wesley Matthews wants to take the scapegoat from Danny Green, I'm fine with that. But no, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, your typical 3-and-D player, and that's going to lead to some good games, some bad games, and maybe seeing a lot of blame when shots don't go down, and a lot of credit when they do. But in a weekend full of adding young talent, let's add some scoring infusion to this team, or some juice to this team. It's nice to see at least the acquisition of an 11-year NBA veteran and someone who's been around as much as Wesley Matthews has had. That's never a bad thing to add to this team. And yeah, as soon as the Lakers lost Danny Green, we knew that a move like this was coming, getting a player of a similar caliber as well. So yeah, I think you kind of mentioned it. It remains to be seen what the starting lineup is going to look like. It seems plausible that he could be in the starting lineup, and if you want to put Schroeder on the bench in that scenario, or KCP, I don't know which one would be on the bench in that scenario, but I guess we can just get into it right now. Actually, let's just, what would your starting five be, or what your guess starting five would be for opening night?
KCP is going to be on the floor.
Okay.
3 years, $40 million.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to come off the bench. But he's earned that start. I think Schroeder starts. Yeah. I really do. I don't know who else outside of LeBron can bring the ball up. KCP can, so I could see KCP and Wesley Matthews starting. I think that's going to be who's going to be the one defensively. LeBron's going to be the one most of the time. But yeah, who's going to be the point in the shooting guard? And so I would like to see Schroeder, KCP, LeBron, AD, obviously, and Marc Gasol night one.
It's funny. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I did jot down, just because I thought it was fun to get into that. At the bottom of my notes, I was like, just starting five real quick. I didn't put a lot of thought into it, but yeah, I just glanced at it as you were talking, and my starting five was Schroeder, KCP, LeBron, AD, and Marc Gasol. So, we were on the same page without really putting a whole lot of thought into it. Now that I'm looking at it, maybe there's an argument that Wesley Matthews is starting instead of KCP. You alluded to the contract, but I don't know if that is a guarantee, or he has to start. Because if you're on the reserve and you're getting a lot of minutes there, you can pile up your stats that way as well.
Oh yeah.
And I think if Schroeder is starting, there is an argument to be had. Hey, let's have KCP in that second unit or whatever it is. And obviously, it doesn't matter who ends up starting. It's all about what lineup is out there on which minute stretch. But that's just an idea that I had, and I thought it was worth exploring since we were talking about the starting lineup so much, especially around the Wesley Matthews. Let's go ahead and talk about the old guys, though, or the guys. Oh, the first guy, anyways, coming back. We've kind of mentioned him already a couple times, but KCP is coming back. This felt like a pretty obvious one that was going to happen, but maybe not as obvious when the move started happening. You're like, hey, is it feasible now that Lakers can get him, and what will be the price point at that? But as we mentioned in the last podcast, I thought this was one of the most valuable supporting players for the Lakers, if not the most valuable supporting player. There's an argument, maybe playoff Rondo was that, but with his 3-and-D skills as well, I thought it was a no-brainer to bring him back, and I'm excited for him to be back. I think I don't know. I feel like he hits big shots. He's a floor spacer. He can guard on the defensive end. He'll run around with guys as well. There's a lot to like about KCP. I know you're the biggest fan of KCP's, though, so I'll let you carry it out. How excited are you for KCP to come back?
I am excited. I've been a KCP fan since he started with the Lakers. Yeah, he brings that three shot, and he brings it defensively, and he's inefficient at times, but who isn't? Um, there's a lot to like about KCP being back. I kind of felt once I saw that Avery Bradley was gone, I felt KCP was definitely going to be back.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just seemed like something that was going to happen. I was really curious what the money was going to look like, because that was a big thing. The Lakers could give him up to 15 million a season. I don't think that's the number, though. I think it's closer to 12, which is what a lot of the cap experts were kind of saying he needed to be at for them to kind of bring back Markieff and stuff like that. And so it's exciting to see him back, and I think he's going to be a key part for them to run it back.
Yeah, the Lakers, we've talked about maybe they had limitations in their half-court offense is a fair way of saying it, but they thrived in transition, and that was a lot because of KCP. I mean, he was very good in transition. I'm just excited for Lakers to show that they are willing to bring someone like that back. I mean, we saw, and this happens with championship teams in general. You win a title, and how you go get paid. I mean, we're about to talk about the rest of the guys who did that, and so that's right, that's deserved. So it's nice to see that Lakers, paid a guy to stay. And I thought he's a valuable piece to what the Lakers are going to try to do this year. And getting another year or 3 years, I guess, of KCP is not a bad thing. So I'm really just happy for you, though, because now you can go get that KCP jersey if you want.
I was thinking that. I was thinking that when we started talking about this. I was, should I get a KCP jersey? And so maybe it's coming. It's probably not an expensive jersey, so maybe we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you have a billion Kobe jerseys. So it makes sense that you could get a current player. Let's talk about some players, though, that left the Lakers or are no longer Lakers because of reasons that, we've kind of discussed already on the pod. I mean, obviously there's only so much cap space and so much roster space. So it led to guys leaving after winning a championship and getting a payday. Those guys are Dwight Howard, Rondo, Avery Bradley, and JaVale McGee. McGee, obviously the last one was recently with the Marc Gasol situation. Let's start with, I think, Dwight Howard because of those guys. I don't know. For me, I thought he had the most likely chance of coming back and the one I was probably the most excited for a chance to come back. But that didn't happen. It was a weird exit for Dwight Howard, who agreed to a one-year deal with the 76ers after tweeting, quote, "I'm staying right where I belong. Laker Nation, I love y'all. Purple and gold never gets old," end quote. I was excited when I saw that tweet. Sent that screenshot to you, and then deleted it like 5 minutes later after everybody had already retweeted it. First of all, I was excited because he tweeted it before Woj or Sham tweeted that Dwight Howard was coming back to Lakers. Obviously, it's because he didn't have a real contract, but also I was just like, holy shit, Dwight Howard broke his own news. Like, that's awesome. Players don't get to do that anymore. But no, and we've mentioned it before already. I mean, we're only 3 podcasts old on Lakers theory here, but we've mentioned how big Dwight Howard was. He was a big part of that Lakers run, last year. He brought a physical presence, as we alluded to, and if for no other reason, for one series against the Nuggets, I thought it would have been important to bring him back. Maybe Marc Gasol alleviates some of that concern with his physical presence, but I think when it's all said and done, the Lakers will probably regret not having Dwight Howard. And it still remains to be seen how they feel at the roster, and maybe they're getting another center. But I feel like this one was the biggest blow of the guys we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'll miss Dwight. This was, I thought he was important to bring back. And I got excited. I was like, yes, he's back. And then, next thing I know, the news is breaking that he's signing with the Sixers. And so I was just like, something happened. And from what I read, the Lakers wanted to make a move and wanted Dwight to wait. And I think he just got impatient and just moved on, or I don't know. That was a weird situation.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we'll ever truly know what happened there. But losing Dwight, it's pretty big. I think he's going to be missed. He brought that special physical presence in the paint, but also I felt like he brought a special energy that might not get matched with the bigs that the Lakers are going to have this year. But still, I'm super glad that Dwight worked out this time.
Yeah.
Forever thankful for what he provided the team. And so he will be missed.
He was a special teammate, I thought, too. I mean, for the Lakers, he accepted that, hey, his role is going to be smaller than it's probably been in his career.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than throwing a fit about it, he accepted it. He was in this kind of platoon system with McGee at the center position. There were series where he wasn't really in it, and there was series where he was huge, like the Nuggets. And when he wasn't, he was like the biggest cheerleader of a teammate. Like he seemed to like to have the most energy on the bench of the guys. And I don't know, it was a joy to watch that version of Dwight Howard. And maybe he's ready for a more important role. I don't know if he'll get that with the Sixers, but maybe he is ready for that. But let's get into another guy who was a big part of at least the playoff stretch for the Lakers, Rondo, who signed a 2-year deal, $15 million deal with the Atlanta Hawks. Are you surprised about the payday for Rondo, or was that about what you expected? And what are you going to miss about Rondo on the team, or will you miss Rondo on the team?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to miss Rondo. I really
That's a perfect
don't.
answer.
Yeah. Rondo felt like the guy every time he had an open shot and took it. I was like, why would you do that? And he would make them. It was always the three. Where I remember us watching the games together, and we're just both like, when did Rondo become a 3-point shooter? Like he wasn't terrible, but
Yeah.
he just, I guess he didn't take them a lot, and we noticed that. But I felt like every time he shot it, I was like, it's stupid. It's terrible. We're going to lose this game. Rondo's taking too many threes. Outside of that, he provided a lot of, I don't know, just energy. I can't remember when he missed the first season, or not the season, the first series.
Yeah.
He came back against the Rockets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Game 2.
That sounds right.
I think it was game 2 he came back.
I think he might have came back game 1, right? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't remember. Yeah. But you could tell, you could see the difference from that first series with Portland, and while he was just off the floor. And I think that was very important. And without Rondo and without Dwight, we might not be champions.
Yeah. Ended the playoffs with 105 assists off the bench, which was an NBA record for the postseason by a player off the bench. But he was 35 and inconsistent, especially in the regular season. Every 5 or 6 games was maybe a good game for Rondo. But obviously playoff Rondo was a more consistent player. I think you were just playing with fire if you thought that version of Rondo was going to come back for the regular season next year. And we mentioned all this when we talked about Schroeder, so we won't get into it much. Let's talk about Avery Bradley, and in my notes it says lastly, but obviously we have another player after that as well. Avery Bradley, this one seemed expected because he opted out of the postseason, agreed to a 2-year, $11.6 million deal with the Miami Heat. And yeah, he opted out before the bubble postseason, and the Lakers won title anyways. So because of that, I assume you weren't surprised at all.
Yeah, I felt like maybe the connection that he had built up, over the course of the season was lost by him not being there, because the playoffs, that's probably that's the most important time of the year. And with them being in the bubble, they don't have the outside influence that you would have in a normal postseason. So it allowed all those guys to just get close. And so him not being there, I think that fractured a little with the team. But when he opted out of his contract, I thought that was just so he could get a pay raise, because the Lakers could have offered him a decent pay raise. I don't think it's what he's getting now, but he could have gotten. I thought that's what he was doing. I thought he was a very realistic guy that was going to come back. And so when you said the Heat, he went to the Heat.
Yeah.
Okay, and so when I saw the news that he signed with the Heat, I was actually kind of surprised,
Okay.
because I really thought he was going to be back. But yeah,
I guess I came about it a different approach when he opted out. I thought there was a chance that this day was coming. The one note I had on him, he shot 44.8% from mid range. I think that added something to a half court offense that we weren't always inspired by, and it added some diversity to it. And I think that will be missed. We talked about with Schroeder. He had more of a mid range game when we noticed on his videotape. So maybe he brings that as well. But I think that part will be missed with Avery Bradley. Lastly, with JaVale McGee, that one was recent, obviously. Again, I think we've come to grips with that one happening when all the Marc Gasol rumors started happening in the last 24 hours. So what was your takeaway from McGee, and what are you going to miss about McGee?
My initial thought when he was traded, I wasn't surprised. There was a lot of it was JaVale was going to be the guy to get traded if he was the main guy that his name was always in each. The Lakers could possibly do this, or they could possibly do this. JaVale was always in it. So I wasn't surprised to see him go. I was a little surprised of kind of the return, because I did pick up Jordan Bell and another guy. I don't remember his name. And so I was a little surprised of that move, because I have no idea what they're going to do with these two guys they got in return. So just from that aspect, I wasn't surprised to see him go. But I like JaVale's energy. They would always flash to him on the sidelines and stuff when he wasn't in the game, and he just, anytime something happened, you could see him hanging over the banner stuff that they have set up and just being goofy. And so on the sideline, I think that'll be missed, because Dwight and him were both kind of played that role when they were on the sideline. They brought that good energy, that goofiness. And so they might not have that this year. And that might be something to look at. It's a pretty small aspect, but if you're missing those good vibes on the sideline, maybe that affects guys differently. So I'll miss him. He's in Cleveland.
Yeah. Sorry, I already forgot.
Possibly that's not where he stays by the time training camp and the season starts. So we'll see. But he helped us win a championship. So for that, I am forever thankful.
Thankful for all these players. No, I think I'm actually glad you brought up the good vibes part, because we look at these moves and say, hey, they got better players and all that stuff. But there is an element to, team chemistry with basketball. And basketball, that sport, almost more than any other, having that team chemistry, and especially in the NBA, these guys hate each other. It's going to blow up in, disastrous fashion. And there's going to be guys tweeting about them, Instagramming about them, and all that stuff. And so, yeah, the good vibes that you're losing by losing these two guys, McGee and Howard, maybe that is cause for concern. And maybe that, the good vibes was apparent because, hey, the Lakers are good and they're winning a title. And these new players, when they find out, hey, the Lakers are good and they're winning a title, that, there's good vibes for them as well. But
yeah,
I don't think, and we talked about this with the Schroeder news as well on the last pod. It's easy to say, hey, look at it from a standpoint of just numbers and saying it looks better on paper and therefore it must be better. But there's always a way it doesn't work out. Yeah. And fortunately, the Lakers have two really good players in LeBron and AD, and so you would think that no matter what, they're going to figure a way out to work this out. But there is ways that hey, it could blow up. I'm not predicting that by any means. Again, I'm predicting a 2021 NBA title, but I think you bringing up that point is a very valid argument, or at least valid point now, because when we look back and say what happened this season, maybe it is just simple as, hey, they didn't like each other as much as last year's team. And maybe that was more important in a bubble environment when they had nothing else going on. But I think just in general, a basketball team needs to have that team chemistry, and one that is expecting to win a title does as well. Let's wrap this up by, I guess, predicting how the rest of the offseason is going, or at least talking about what's to come. The Lakers have to fill out their roster. It's not much, though. I think the big things that we're looking at right now is Markieff Morris and Anthony Davis, who are not on the team at the moment. Austin, tell me what you're expecting, at least with those two, because you're our contract free agent guy, de facto free agent contract guy. So tell me what's going down with those two.
So AD's going to come back. Okay. I don't think anyone believes they're going to get AD other than the Lakers. So that, that's good. I have no idea about Markieff now. I would like to think he's going to come back. I think it's going to have to be on a vet min contract. I don't know if they can offer him more, which they could have before. And so that's something to keep an eye out. I've seen that the Clippers are obviously interested in, also the Raptors. And so that's something to look out for. I think, and I saw this from someone else, I think the Lakers bring back Jared Dudley. Yeah, and so what this person said, I don't remember who it was, but they said he was
citing your sources.
Yeah. They said he's like an amazing locker room guy. And so with, all these new pieces, that's going to be important. And so I see them recognizing his impact on a team, just inside the locker room, because he doesn't get a lot of minutes. And so I think that's a spot that they fill with him. And so, there's not a lot for them. I personally think they still need another center. But that leaves Boogie Cousins. He's still out there. I haven't heard any news other than at the very beginning that he was getting interest from across the league. And so he's still out there. That's something to keep an eye on. But outside of that, it's kind of, they're tight. There's not a lot of space to operate. They're working on a hard cap. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they fill it out.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Dudley because I think I feel like we're both pretty confident. A lot of people seem confident that he's coming back. And he may not play a big role, but I would argue that, the guys that are about to fill out the roster with aren't going to play a big role, because if you look up and down this roster of the guys who are currently on it, and we'll just include AD in there as well. I mean, that's a really good group. And it's going to be hard to find minutes outside those guys when you're behind all those guys. So that's why, they are hard pressed to find, financial or roster room in general for the next guys. But I don't expect them to be a big part of what's going to happen. Getting a little concerned for my guy, Talen Horton-Tucker. He might start getting buried on the depth chart.
So real quick, that's interesting because obviously I can't cite who said this because I don't pay attention to that. I just read what they say.
Austin, I make sure I make that note in there if I have it.
So Jared Dudley was saying to watch out for him because I guess in the bubble he was just tearing it up, and we saw that when he played a little bit. He was great, and so Dudley said that he wouldn't be surprised to see him in the rotation this year.
I hope so.
Just to allude to that. We didn't get to see a lot of him, so it's something exciting to look forward to.
Yeah, I told you when they drafted him, I was very excited about him. He was actually someone I watched in person covering college basketball, and I'm very excited about Talen Horton-Tucker. I guess, is there anybody else on your wish list? I know you had a wish list last time. Do you have one now, or you kind of alluded to some of the names already? Is there anything you're expecting that's not currently on the team or rumored close to the team?
No.
Mhm.
I do think bringing Markieff Morris back is
Okay.
pretty important. I think you got to try to get him on the team. I personally don't think Boogie Cousins is that connected to the Lakers. But I do think I want him on the team. I know he was there last year for a little bit, and I believe the year before too. So, I would like him on the team. I think he brings something that the Lakers scheme might fit him well.
Yeah.
If he's healthy and he can get on the court and we can actually see Boogie Cousins like we used to see him.
Well, the roster is coming into shape, and that's exciting. We had a loose discussion about our starting five, but future podcasts will have a better and bigger discussion about that and what we think the rotations are going to be. And that's really the more interesting thing to me. Don't care about all this contract stuff, as I've mentioned. So that's why I let you carry it on that end. Any final thoughts, Austin, before we get out of here? I know this is going to be a shorter podcast than normal. We've gone over an hour the last two times.
No thoughts from me at the moment.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that you got your voice heard. I think we will probably, we're recording this on Sunday, November 22nd. We will probably record before Thanksgiving, I would assume. But I guess if there's nothing that happens over the next couple of days, then maybe we don't record and we just wait till after Thanksgiving. But I thought it was important, and Austin thought it was important to record now and discuss these roster moves that happened over the weekend so that you got our analysis on it. But keep following social media channels to see when we are going to record next or when the next podcast drops. That's at Lakers Theory at Facebook, or on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. I think we're on Spotify, technically, the audio version. I don't know audio version anywhere else right now. We're still waiting to hear back from Apple. Apparently, it has to be a big deal to have an Apple podcast. So we're still waiting on that. But we'll always have these video podcasts. Eventually, we'll start live streaming these podcasts and then having people be able to comment in there and interact with us while we do these shows. But we figured the first handful of shows didn't have to be live broadcasts because nobody really knows us just yet. But we hopefully get to know people and we get better at this. And I think it already is better. This is the third podcast. It's already been better than the first. So that's going to do it for this show. Again, stay tuned on social media for our next show. But congrats to the Lakers for winning a 2021 NBA title. So for Austin Case, I'm Shane Jackson. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.